Welcome back, my friends. So we are in the second lesson, second video for our musical elements. We just left off in our last video listening to the planets. So we were listening to Gustav Holst, the planets, and we were talking about rhythms, and you had filled out your Google Slides up until here. So if you have not done that, go back and watch the previous video, fill out these 3 Google Slides, and we're going to pick right where we left off on texture. So we're up to texture now. Alrighty, so texture. So texture is a little bit complicated to talk about in music, but it's really just the relationships of musical elements within a piece. So that's why we're doing it fourth, because we learned about melody, harmony, and rhythm. Now this is how those elements are layered and interact with one another to create the sound. So we have several different types of texture to talk about. We have monophonic texture, homophonic texture, and polyphonic texture. All right, so homophonic is really, or monophonic is just one. So if we're just listening to one thing by itself, one voice, one instrument playing a solo, that's monophonic texture, alrighty? And then if we're listening to homophonic texture, that means more than one. That means it's going to also usually be homorhythmic, or it's going to be lots of pitches sounding at the same time, but they're rhythmically really similar. Polyphonic is going to be lots of different melodies going on at once. We're not going to dig too much into that in this class specifically, but these are 3 great terms to know and to understand. So let's talk about some really fun songs that have really recognizable texture. We're going to look at Beethoven number 5. Maybe you don't recognize the maybe you don't recognize the name of it, but I bet you would recognize it if I went bum 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 bum. That is going to be a recognizable melody and rhythm together, but then the texture is the fact that you know it's orchestral. And so that is going to be a great example of texture, is that Beethoven number 5. Smooth by Santana is going to have that too, because you know that you can expect certain instruments in that. So I want you to listen to those instruments and see if you can figure out what kind of texture is. Sometimes it's like Hold On by Wilson Phillips, which has a lot of really great harmonies with and a memorable melody, but it also has some really classic 80s and early 90s band sounds that give it that 90s, early 2000s, or yeah, 90s and 80s sound. So that's going to be an example of texture. Let's go ahead and listen to Africa by Straight No Chaser. Now, you may have heard the song Africa before, because it's a very famous song, but this one is different, and I want you to see if you can tell me why the texture is interesting on this version of Africa.
Hear the drums echoing tonight. She hears only whispers of some quiet conversation. She's coming in 12:30 flight. Red wings reflect the stars that guide me towards salvation. I stopped an old man along the way, hoping to find some old forgotten words of ancient melody. He turned to me as if to say, hurry, boy, it's waiting there for you.
Okay, I just want to listen to that whole song. I love it so much. But what did you notice about this version of Africa that might be different? Let me take you one step further if you're not sure. What instruments did you hear? Did you hear drums? Did you hear guitar? Did you hear the saxophone? Did you hear strings? If you're thinking, Miss Fred, all I heard was voices. You would be correct. This was done by an entirely all-male a cappella choir. All men, only singing a cappella. So a cappella, a great example of this is the movie Pitch Perfect. If you've seen that, if you haven't, homework, go watch Pitch Perfect. But really good fun movie for you, but it's all a cappella music. And so this is a great example of texture. Straight No Chaser's texture is going to include a beatboxer, it's going to include all men singing, and it's going to include some men singing just the rhythms. You hear that do 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 do, and then and then you hear the melody come in with other men singing, but there's no other instruments. This texture is all men's a cappella. So that's a great example of texture. It doesn't have to be something special or unique to be texture like this one is. It can just be specific instruments. Rock has its own texture. Pop punk has its own texture. So you have to think about this. Orchestras have a texture. So thinking about what makes it unique using all of those elements, all the different instrument families, as well as harmony, rhythm, and texture, or harmony, rhythm, and harmony, rhythm, and melody. All right, don't forget you're following along in your notes. We're moving on to the purple slide, and we're gonna go to dynamics. Dynamics, all right. So dynamics, easy peasy. You know this one by heart. Variations in loudness or intensity of sound in music. This is gonna range from very soft to very loud, which is gonna be indicated by notation symbols such as P for soft and F for loud. This is going to be used to convey expression, emotion, and contrast. So this is just the loudness or the softness, not the fastness or the slowness, but just whether something is soft, loud, or somewhere in between, or a little bit of everything. All right, so that is really fun. Here are some great examples of songs with recognizable dynamics. We have Carmina Burana by Orff. We have Don't Speak. She sings her melodies, and Don't Speak, she'll sing her verses really soft, you and me, and then the drums really kick in for the chorus, Don't Speak. All right, and then there's some great classical examples. So we're going to look at one classical example. It's called In the Hall of the Mountain King, and it's really fun because it's one of those line writer ones where he's like skiing and it's showing the music. I'm just going to show one little clip of this from the middle and where it gets a little bit louder, but I want you to watch from the beginning because it's also just a fun video to watch. So here we go. Actually, let me make sure that I'm sharing my sound. Okay, here we go. Line writer, here we go. Turning off light textures going forward. Okay, so this is a great piece to actually signify all of them because they were using light texture, fewer instruments, to make the quieter sounds. Now, a whole orchestra can play very softly together and very loud together, just as much as a few people can, or a few instruments can be very loud if they want. Think about if you have a younger sibling or a baby in your house. When they want to be loud, they can be loud all by themselves. So it doesn't mean dynamics doesn't mean more or playing, but sometimes it's an effective way. So a bunch of babies sleeping can be very quiet dynamics, but a bunch of babies yelling can be very loud dynamics, just like one baby sleeping or one baby screaming can be very loud and one baby sleeping can be very quiet. So it's not the texture is the how they do it, but the volume is what the dynamics are. And that's what you need to focus on when you're thinking about dynamics. This piece would be great to talk about melody, rhythm, harmony, texture, timbre, all of it. So definitely do that. We're up to timbre in our notes. So this is what's coming next for you is timbre. So let's go back to the lecture and start talking about timbre. So timbre is the unique characteristics of sound that distinguish it from others. Timbre is like color, all right? And it looks like timbre or timbre, but the way you pronounce it is timbre. Everybody say it with me. Timbre. Now you know how to say that word correctly. The reason why it's timbre and not timbre is because it's a French word. And in French, the IM sound is not an I, but it's an sound, timbre. So that's why we say timbre. And this is going to be influenced by factors such as instrument shape, material, and playing technique. It's going to contribute to the overall character and mood of music. A great way to think about timbre is to think about voices. So maybe if you're thinking about your dad might have a very deep timbre. He might have a very, very deep voice. Whereas your mom might have a nice, soft, more musical, melodic timbre. But your mom might also use different timbre, right? Think about the way your mom says your name when you're in trouble versus the way she says it when she's happy with you. So you give your mom flowers for Mother's Day and she says, oh, Jimmy, thank you so much, right? Versus Jimmy. So those are two different timbres, and you know what each of those timbres mean. This is the color of it, and it's also going to be influenced by the type. So your mom and dad can have different timbres because they have different voices, but they can also use different timbre within their voices. The best example of timbre that I can show you is a song that is very recognizable, but the song is played on a different instrument. So I put a lot of great examples in here, and you have access to all of them in your class playlist, but we're going to talk about the celeste or the celeste. Either one is correct. You can pronounce that word both ways. We're going to listen to a very recognizable melody. So I'm not sure if you've ever thought about what that is played on before, but I'm betting that you have heard it before. I'm betting very much that you have heard this before. This is Harry Potter theme on a celesta or a celesta. Celesta is probably the more accurate pronunciation because it is an Italian word, and that would be celesta. But if you were to say celeste as a instrument, people in the music world would know what you were talking about. So this is such a fun melody. It's also very memorable, but the timbre sounds very unique on the celesta. And that is what makes it so recognizable. You don't just think of how that tone sounds, but you think of how it sounds on this particular instrument. So that is where we are right now. I think that is a fantastic stopping point. We're going to get through all of these. Now you're gonna have some active listening examples, but we're gonna get to that in the next lecture. So I will see you in the next one.